Hi guys, it's Ben here from T-Rex Space Station. How's everyone doing? This is going to be my video response to this month's Friday Foursome, which asks the question, who are the 4 video game related people that you would invite to a dinner party? Now, these aren't fictional characters taken from video games. These are actually real people who've had some involvement in the development of a video game. They don't actually have to still be alive though, so there is some flexibility. This is a very interesting question. It's one that I had to scratch my head about, but I've managed to come up with my list of 4 people, and I hope that you guys will do too. And as always, please post a video response onto the Novabug's Friday Foursome video page, which I'll post a link to in the thingy below. Okay, so number 1 then is Allo, which I'm sure most of you guys have heard of Allo. Allo is a famous developer for Sierra software, and we're looking at, around the 80s, early 90s period, which is really where I was cutting my teeth in video games. That was around when I was just starting to play my first video games. And Sierra games were a big deal for me back in the day. Those were my first introduction to point-and-click adventure games, which are really one of my favourite types of video game, and one that I've looked back on very fondly as an adult. Now, of course, Allo's biggest accolade is the Leisure Suit Larry series, which is absolutely iconic. I can remember playing it when I was a kid, and my parents being like really tetchy about me playing it because they knew there was so much dodgy adult content in there. But the Leisure Suit Larry series was really important because it was the first kind of video game series that directly dealt with adult themes. And it had lots of humour in there, but lots of adult humour, and it kind of pushed the boundaries as to what video games could actually do and the areas where they could go to and what they could explore. Before that we hadn't really had games that were so overtly adult and that included so many hilarious or rude jokes like that. And for me, this was the development of the modern adventure game, which often pokes fun at things, has lots of witticisms, and sometimes has rude stuff in there, has adult content. Allo is a very funny guy. You'll only have to play the first Leisure Suit Larry game to know that he has a great sense of humour and that there's so much wittiness packed into those games that will make you laugh your head off. He actually still has a website now, and it's got loads of, I think he's developed like a gag generator type program or something. I don't think he's still directly involved in game development, but he has to be recognised as making such a big contribution to the point-and-click video game genre, and of just being a funny guy that pushed the boundaries. And I've always been drawn to characters that push the boundaries in terms of what video games can do, what they're about, and how offensive they can be, because it's all about having fun and taking the piss sometimes, isn't it? And if you haven't actually played the Leisure Suit Larry series, I strongly recommend that you do it, even though the graphics look really, really basic and a bit, they can run on my 286. There's a certain charm to them, and there's a certain skill in making characterizations through tiny little pixels. It was very limited what they could do. I think that was made using the AGI editor, which you can actually still download and play with yourself, and I remember I have had a few goes with it. It's very limited stuff and a really impressive game. So, still related to the point-and-click adventure game type genre then, my next guest would be Tim Schafer. And, the kind of natural step on for me from the Sierra stuff was the LucasArts games, the LucasArts point-and-clicks. Again, these occupied a huge amount of my time and of my interest in video games when I was younger, and were a big stepping stone for me into getting into these sorts of video games with complex plots and puzzles and things. Tim Schafer is another one who has a great sense of humour, and there's a lot of characterization and wittiness and humour in the dialogue in the LucasArts games that he was involved with. Take your pick of great games that he's been involved directly in developing. the Monkey Island games 1 and 2. He did pretty much 2/3 of, or more than that, the dialogue in there, and you'll know how great the dialogue in that game is. It's full of humour, it's full of one-liners. It's just funny, and Tim Schafer and Allo have both had this big contribution in terms of putting funny into these adventure games. One of my personal favourite point-and-click adventure games was Day of the Tentacle, and Tim Schafer again was involved directly and heavily with the development of that game. Day of the Tentacle is a game that for me set a lot of precedence in terms of the art style of the LucasArts games, and for adventure games going forward. It was very quirky and creative and cartoony, and it just drew the eye instantly. And these games haven't aged because it was all pixel art, and so they still look good to this day. There's still a lot of characterization and quirkiness and uniqueness about the art style in those games that Tim Schafer was developing. Full Throttle is another personal favourite of mine that he was involved in, and I would just love to chat to him about, you know, how he came up with the dialogue in those games, how he came up with the characters and the art styles, and, you know, just share some jokes with him and see what his sense of humour is actually like in real life, because, you know, you can just see it seeping out of the pores of those games. You just know that those two guys would be a lot of fun to chat to. Next up then would be Rianna Pratchett, the daughter of Terry Pratchett. Now, I know I could have chosen Terry, but, you know, even though he was involved in video games, because he had the Discworld point and clicks in Discworld Noir, that wasn't his main thing. Rianna Pratchett is really a video game story writer, I suppose would be the best way of describing her. And I think it would be absolutely fascinating to meet her. Firstly, to talk about what it was like growing up with Terry, you know, my favourite author, such a big contributor to fantasy, you know, and how his ideas and his creativity influenced her own ideas, and how those things have had knock-on effects on the stories that she's written and woven into modern video games. You know, whether any of his ideas and his thought processes had rubbed off on her, and had, you know, I'm sure that they have. I'm sure they've had a big influence. Rianna was directly involved in development of stories for some great games. No, one of the best being the recent Tomb Raider game, which is a superb game and was probably my favourite game that came out that year. And one of the things that's always been important to me in modern video games, in video games that are supposed to have some narrative, is the development of a good story, of a proper story that's had attention to detail and development in it. And Rianna is quite passionate about this. About the integration of seamless stories into video games, about the development of characters, and more importantly, having the writer as a central part of video game development rather than somebody who's tagged in later. And she's often described herself as like a first aid kit for video game stories. You know, sometimes games are made and the plot's kind of, you know, hashed out, and then they think, oh shit, it doesn't read well, it doesn't flow well, let's get a writer in to fix it. I think that's more of a historic thing, and part of what Rianna Pratchett's been pushing to do, and what I think we need to see happening more and more, and is happening, is the central focus of the story as part of the driver and an integral part in the game design process. One of the things I've been really interested in recently is Twine. Now, Twine is software for developing basic but interactive stories, and, you know, branching plots and fiction that you have a choice in. And, you know, this is becoming one of the important parts of modern gaming is branching narrative and interactive fiction. And you'll find lots of games on Steam that focus almost just on storytelling and choices, with very little else to the gameplay. And that's an exciting thing, and Rianna, as an advocate of that, would be fascinating to talk to hear her ideas about narrative development, story development, and, you know, the centricity of the narrator in the development of a video game. So yes, fascinating person. Last but not least then is Thomas Biskup, who pretty much independently, in his own bedroom, on a computer, designed the most detailed, engaging, thorough, fantastic, beautiful piece of art and gaming that is Allo, Ancient Domains of Mystery. There is no better roguelike in my opinion. The game has so much detail, so much complexity, and above all, so much choice, that it really is a masterpiece. And to think that it was programmed by one man, and you're talking about years and years, if not, you're talking about decades of programming here. The game is still in development now, and it's been so constantly being revised and updated for years. It really is a testament to his diligence and creativity as a programmer. There are some great ideas in there. There's a god system, there's, you know, an alliance system, there's magic, there's fighting, there's random risks, there's all the things you want in a roguelike game. And I would love to speak to him about his ideas, about, you know, how he developed his god systems, about how he's taken traditional roguelikes like Rogue, that's not a roguelike, that is the original, you know, like Rogue, and developed on them, and how roguelikes have remained relevant to today. Because if you look on Steam, there are lots of new games coming out that focus on those mechanics that we first found in Rogue and early roguelikes, and how he sees that influencing modern gaming and pushing us forward into the new era of RPGs, which have undoubtedly taken influences from the statistics and the dungeon crawling and the exploration and the randomness of roguelike games. Of course they have. You only have to look at Rogue to see that modern games have taken a lot from that. And I'd like to ask him about, you know, his ideas for games and ideas for, you know, bedroom programmers, for how people can start off projects on their own. And I'm sure he'd be an inspiring guy to speak to in terms of motivating yourself and pushing yourself forward to think what you could achieve. Actually, Allo has now had a Kickstarter campaign, and he's now developing a graphical tile set So that what was relatively punishing in the past, ASCII based, just a blank screen with ASCII on it, now he's developing music and graphics, which is what we've always kind of dreamt that add-on could be. And it's going to turn into something even bigger than it already is. At the moment, I think it's relatively underground for the hardcore people, but once it takes off on Steam and gets graphics, well, there's no limit to it, I don't think. So those are my 4 people, 4 video game related people that I think would be fascinating to talk to, fascinating to invite to dinner. And I look forward to hearing your own answers to this question. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you all soon.